Hope you're having a great start to your week. We want to thank you so much for joining us and welcome you into Aspire to Retire with Ralph and Tim Short of Welcome Home Financial Partners. You can find out more about Ralph and Tim, the entire team at Welcome Home Financial Partners at the website, welcomehomefp.com. You can also give a call if you have questions about things we talk about this week on the show or just questions about your financial retirement outlook in general. You want to know a little bit more. It all starts with that complimentary, no cost, no obligation consultation. 804-635-3550 is that phone number. Once again, 804-635-3550. My name is Chris Swan. I'm pleased to be joined by the father-son team behind Welcome Home Financial Partners, Ralph and Tim. Glad to be with you for another show. How are we doing today?
Doing great.
We're doing good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Just enjoying this post-Valentine's Day, half-price candy. That's always a plus for me.
There you go.
Appreciate you guys taking time to spend with the listeners here. Let's start the show talking about the markets, because a lot of people, that's, where a large portion of their investment accounts is tied to. And if you look at the market for the past 100 years or so, since 1928, before the Great Depression, annualized returns for the S&P 500, average returns, have been 9.8%. Well, Goldman Sachs is now forecasting that number for the next 10 years is going to go down to 3.1%, which is a pretty steep drop. And I have to think those 10 years are going to be vital for new retirees, those in the red zone right now. So what is the danger of low or even negative returns for retirees in those first years of retirement? And if the forecast does come true, is getting 3% as a return enough, or are there other options that people should be looking at for where to put their money?
Oh, absolutely. There's other options. And I think, when you sit there and you talk about 9.8% versus 3.1%, that is a huge difference. And, think of it this way. If you have all your money in the market and you jump into retirement, now all of a sudden we've got a couple of bad years and you're withdrawing funds, you're going to need a really big rebound. But the actual, annualized return, if you will, doesn't really tell you the whole story, right? So that's why it's important to make sure that you do allocate your money elsewhere. Because if we do, if they're right, and I don't think any forecast is ever spot on,
right?
But if they are correct and we do have, negative years, you want to make sure that you've got some protection built in there, because, if we've got another 2008 or what have you, it's not going to look quite as good as you wanted it to for retirement. You might have to go back to work. So, when you take a look at the bull run that we've had, we know eventually this thing's going to come to an end. When is it going to come to an end, and how much of a pullback there's going to be in the market is going to be determined amongst many things. And there's been a lot of volatility in the market as of late. So it's important to protect yourself, because if we don't get an average of almost 10% and we're only in the 2s or the 3s, you want to make sure that you've got some protection there.
One thing I would say to most people is that a comment I make to them is, numbers don't lie, but liars use numbers. So the only way, Chris, for you to get to 9.8% as an average since 1928, believe it or not, I haven't been around in the stock market since 1928. So that 9.8% really doesn't mean anything to most people, because they haven't been around that long. If you've been investing in the market probably since the 80s, it's probably a little bit different since 1928. So you need to understand that the market's going to go up, the market's going to go down. It depends on how that affects you, is whether you need that money to pay your mortgage, to do the things that you want to do. And if you have to take it out in a down market, guess what? You're going to hurt yourself in the long run. So that's why when Tim was talking about having different buckets of money or different piles of money for liquidity, for long-term growth, for basically doing some of the things that you want to do in the next 2 to 5 years, that's what we sit down and talk to people about through our roadmap, because it's just not about growth when you're in retirement. You have to have some growth, but you need to understand that your paycheck's going to be dependent upon how well you save money and where you put your money. Because if the market dropped 50% tomorrow and you needed some money out of that account, guess what? You're going to have to get sell twice as much stocks or bonds, whatever, in order to get the same amount of money. How do you think that's going to affect you when you need money 20 years from now? That has a dire effect on people. So that's why you need different buckets of money to pull money out when you need it.
Yeah, and we tell people, when you're getting into retirement, you don't need to be chasing that return, right? I mean, obviously, everybody, we need to make money, right? I mean, let's be honest. But on the same side is, if you're chasing that 10% return, I'm just rounding up from 9.8 to 10. Sure. But if you're chasing that 10% return, that might come back and bite you. And I think that's what's important is, going to the bucket analogy is, yeah, you can have a bucket of money that's going to be in the market. And, when things are bad, we make some tweaks and adjustments, but on the same token is you don't need that money anymore, right? So you don't need that money to live on. So you can ride the roller coaster, if you will, because if you're in the market, no matter when you're in the market, you're going to be riding a roller coaster. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of experts that think that, as of late, what's called the Magnificent Seven has been kind of carrying the load, if you will, with the stock market. Yeah. So if you're relying on 7 companies to carry the market, that just kind of sums up the volatility that we've had. So once again, it's really important as we're approaching retirement to stop riding the roller coaster with every dollar we have.
And most people aren't going to look at the averages, because if you're in certain investments, guess what? That doesn't mean that your money is going to grow like the average, because just like you say, in Magnificent Seven over the past couple of years, man, you've had a good ride.
Right.
But how long is that going to last? Because it cannot continue to have 40 and 50% growth over an extended period of time. Is it going to continue to go up? Probably so. But is it going to grow as much as you're thinking? So there, once again, you go back to math and numbers and averages and all that. What are you trying to accomplish? That's the main thing you should be focused on. And anybody that listens to any prognosticators, they don't really understand what's going on. They just say, based on what we're seeing, this is what it's going to be. They don't say, I could be right, I could be wrong. They just say, this is the way it's going to be. You have to make that judgment call on whether you should be in high-tech stock only, or whether you should be throttled back some and maybe just do some indexes and things of that nature. However, you need some help when you come to trying to figure that out. And that's kind of where we go through the investments that we recommend based on what you're trying to do and your risk tolerance. That's the biggest thing a lot of people don't fully understand. You'll have people come in and say, I don't want to do anything with risk whatsoever, but they expect 20% return. I'm like, well, that can't happen that way, at least in my experience of 40 some years. What about you, Tim?
Well, my experience of 40 years, I started investing when I was a baby, apparently. It's one of the biggest things, talking about the risk factors and risk tolerance is time horizon, right? So if you're in the market and you're 20 or 30 years old, yes, you're going to have time to recoup. But as you're approaching what we call the retirement red zone or in retirement, maybe we need to throttle back a little bit on that risk. So I think that's what's often overlooked is, okay, yeah, look at it this way. If you put 100 grand into the market and it lost 50%, you got 50 grand. Right. So if you have automatic rebound of 50%, which the volatility in the market as of late kind of feels that way.
Maybe.
But if you had an automatic 50% rebound, you don't have $100,000. You only have 75. So if you take a look at the returns, it's kind of misleading, if you will, to a point. And then that's where people kind of get roped into, well, in the past, last year I made this, prior year I made that. The last 2 years of the market have been really good, but the year before was really bad. So that's what you got to take a look at. Take a look at your risk tolerance, where you're at for retirement, and that's where we can step in.
In this great bull market that we've been going through, a lot of these people that make predictions, they've kind of been wrong, because they kept predicting that we're probably going to go through a recession, probably a big drop in the market. But guess what? They weren't exactly correct over the last couple of years. Now, what's it going to be over the next 2 or 3 years? Who knows? Only God, I guess, is the one that knows.
Yeah, I think everybody has to have a hot take. So everybody wants to be the first to claim that they said it or they did it or they were the first one to forecast it. And, 99% of those people are probably going to be wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I think I remember back to 2020, when the markets took their dip in March, when COVID really put the country on pause and high alert. People have been calling for the market to take a downturn any minute, and then immediately they're like, well, it's going to rebound any second now. Now, they were right. There was a quick rebound there, but it's almost their job to be contrarian, because that's what generates viewership and listenership. And here's the thing. We were joking before the show about how earlier this past week, the predictions of snow in Virginia,
right.
It could be 2 inches, it could be 10 inches. That is a pretty wide variance. But at least hearing that, probably need to take a coat if I'm going to go outside. There's going to be market volatility. Maybe we're going to get 3% returns. Maybe it's going to be 6%. You need to have a plan one way or another. With inflation always a factor, it's always going to be a factor in some capacity. Hopefully it gets reduced further than it is right now, you need that growth potential for future dollars. And the growth opportunity in the market can't be understated. So you do want to have some money tied to the market, but you don't want the entirety of it because, as you guys pointed out there, if you're withdrawing and the market is down 20, 30%, well, you're compounding those losses with those withdrawals, and it becomes a deeper hole for you to try to dig yourself out of. So have a plan in place, have that diversification where if the market's not being favorable, you're not utilizing those assets to generate that income, but you're using other sources that are perhaps more stable, providing consistent, dare I say, guaranteed income. That's part of the retirement roadmap process, and that's what the team at Welcome Home Financial Partners helps you with, get you to, through, and beyond retirement, regardless of what the market is throwing at us. It all starts with setting up a time to speak with them, a complimentary time. You can go to the website and schedule a time there, find out more about the team and the retirement roadmap process at welcomehomefp.com, or you can give a call right now, 804-635-3550. As a reminder, right now, we know it is early in the morning. This is not the call. This is not the meeting. You don't have to worry about that. This is just to get on their calendar for the week ahead and find a time that's going to work conveniently for you. But that number one more time, 804-635-3550 for that complimentary consultation. Now, I ran across an article on moneytalksnews.com that listed the dumb money mistakes people make after age 50. Don't really like calling people, or I guess the mistakes they make, dumb, but things that people do that are ill-advised. Let's put it that way. One of them
could have been better.
It could have been better. Yeah,
There you go.
Didn't put forth my best effort, I guess. But one of those mistakes was not hiring a financial advisor. What are the benefits of going with you guys, a team like Welcome Home Financial Partners, rather than that DIY mentality?
Well, I think there's a lot of folks around here that have that mentality because I shouldn't say the word cheap, so I won't, but I think everybody's a little bit frugal.
Frugal, yes.
And they don't necessarily find the value. But if you take a look, what has happened in the past, Vanguard did a study that, if you had hypothetically $500,000 investment over 25 years, it would grow to 1.7 million if you managed it yourself. But if you had a financial professional or advisor or fiduciary, it would be 3.4 million. If you worked with the advisor. So that's twice as much. So that kind of just sums it up right there.
Yeah.
Right. So, there's a lot of people that do really well at investing, but then there are a lot of folks that don't, and they just kind of sit it and forget it. And you can use that strategy with some of your money, but you want to make sure that you're making improvements along the way. And I think that's where people get it wrong, because we see it quite a bit where people come in to see us and they've worked for, for instance, Philip Morris for, 40 years. And, it's like, hey, what's the strategy behind it? And they're like, well, I'm just all into the stock. And it's like, well, you've got all of your money. You got $1 million+ sitting in one company stock. I'm not quite sure if that's the retirement strategy I'd recommend for you. Or, they've got different options and they're in 4 or 5 different funds, but they've been the same way for 40 years. So we see that quite a bit. And you got to make sure that you're, utilizing other assets, other avenues, other vehicles, because if you're just using the same thing for 40 years, it's probably not going to work out quite as much. And you won't be quite as efficient with your money. Everybody wants that $3.4 million over the 1.7. So I think that's where a lot of folks get it wrong, is they're so afraid, of paying a fee. But, we've seen it and heard it in the news before, where there are some folks out there that just aren't quite as honest and they're worried about getting burned or scammed. So I think that those all kind of come into play.
Yeah, and I would say for a lot of people there's a big difference between an investment plan and a retirement plan.
Yes.
Because it's just not about chasing that big pot of money at the end of the rainbow, which is great when you're young. But guess what? When you get closer to retirement, that is what you're going to use to provide your paycheck, to provide you income, to pay your bills, do the things that you want to do. The other thing I'd say to a lot of people is, no matter what industry you're in, you probably have a lot of different avenues that you use to do your job. Now, have you been educated in our profession as far as financial management, as far as tax strategies, as far as insurance planning, long-term care, and even how do you get your most tax efficient plans back to you? Because guess what? Sooner or later, no matter how big that pot of gold is, whether it's 1.7 or 3.4, you're going to have to start taking money out whether you want to or not. How do you do that? What if you had to take $200,000 out of your retirement account that's been pre-tax? How's that going to affect you? Most people don't even think about that until it's too late. And that's when you really do need the help. And that's the added value that I think financial advisors bring to most clients, because you have to know outside just the investment world how it affects what you're going to do with your money. And most people have not been trained. They haven't gone and got an MBA. They haven't got a master's in finance. They haven't been doing anything but what they were doing at their 401k at work or their SEPI or whatever it is. But how much help did you have along the way? Probably, I know from experience with HR departments, they're not going to give you advice. They're going to give you the paperwork for you to make that decision. Because why? They don't want to be caught up in a lawsuit that you gave the wrong advice to them. And that's a fact of life these days. Think about it out there in the general public. How many times have you sat down with your HR department to discuss your investment goals so you can determine what your 401k, how you should allocate it? Probably not very many times. You probably got more advice from your employees that you work with, your coworkers, whatever, or just water talk around the water cooler. You know, how good of advice is that? How do they know what you want to do? Chris, I would say that when you retire, probably 45 or 50 years from now, you're so young that your goals in retirement is going to be completely different than mine at the same time period. So you need to understand what your goals are and have somebody that help you get there. And that's what we bring to the table. It's not all this knowledge and stuff, which is a lot of it, but it's trying to understand what you're doing so we can help get you there, because that's the most important thing. It's not about what I want you to do. It's about what you want. Can we get you there?
Yeah, and it's important to find the right advisor too. I mean, there's many financial advisors out there, and some of them, all they do is they look at your investments and try to grow. Well, I think a lot of people get it wrong where they're trying to find ways to get to that $1 million mark or $2 million mark, and they're chasing that number. Well, congratulations when you get there. That's great. But now what are you going to do? Right. And I think, I'm working currently with a couple who've saved about $4.4 million. They've done really well. They've got different types of accounts, different investments. And I kind of looked at them when we started the roadmap process, and I looked and said, well, what are you expecting to get from us? And because the wife actually handled all of this, and she goes, well, I feel like we've done pretty good, but now we're getting close to retirement. And now she's like, I just don't know what to do.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're looking for different, strategies and options, things that they've overlooked, because in her words is she doesn't know what she didn't know. So, most people will look at a couple like that and it's like, well, what do you need any help for? You've done well with saving. Well, it's not about that once you get into retirement. It's about how you're going to generate the income. How can you protect some assets? How do you still look for growth in retirement years?
And also, you need to understand where your money's coming from and the tax implications of it. Because if you're pulling money out of your pre-tax accounts, it's all going to be taxable to you. Believe it or not, Chris, I know that you're a young whippersnapper, but the older you get, you're still going to pay taxes no matter what your income is. That's what depends on your taxes, not just your age or whether you're retired or not. It's all about the income. The more you make, the more you're going to pay Uncle Sam, whether you like it or not.
I love that you think that I'm still 30 to 40 years out from retirement. I hope it's much sooner than that. But, I appreciate it. I'll take the flattery. When I bought my first house, I was proud. And I was going to say, I'm going to do all these home repair things because it was a bit of a fixer-upper. I said, I'm going to go to the hardware store. I'm going to take care of this drywall problem. And I'm going to do this and that and X, Y, and Z. And I did the first, the wall in the bedroom. I took care of the drywall, and it took me twice as long as I thought it was going to. It took me twice as many supplies, but it was a point of pride. I wanted to be a DIY, home repair sort of guy. And I think I changed a ceiling fan. That I'm well versed enough to do. And then I had to put in a garbage disposal. And I looked at it, I went, no, this is not for me. This is not my skill set. And I found a guy. His name was Alex, and he was great. He was a true handyman. There were a couple projects around the house that we needed taken care of, and I asked him for recommendations. I said, do you know someone who can do this? Do you know somebody who can do that? Every time he said, I could do it. And he, sure enough, he did a great job till finally we asked him, I said, what can't you do? He said, I don't paint. I don't want to paint. I never bothered learning it. That's his thing. knowing what you can and can't do, I get there's a point of pride in wanting to do it yourself and being a DIY investor. Sure, it's fun. But as you pointed out, there are times where how do I now turn these investments into income? How do I now turn this into a retirement plan? And it is okay to say you don't know. I say it all the time with my son. He asks so many questions and it's great. He's got that very curious mind. And I say, I don't know, but I always follow it up with, let's find out. Maybe you don't know how you're going to turn these retirement accounts into retirement to income. That is okay. Maybe you don't know about the taxes or what you're going to do about healthcare or, when to turn on Social Security. That is okay. Just know where to turn. Let someone with the experience, with the know-how, like Ralph and Tim, the team at Welcome Home Financial Partners, get you to where you want to be, not where every retiree wants to be, because no retirement plan is going to be the same. And that's the same thing at Welcome Home Financial Partners. No plan is the same because no client is the same. No one's dreams are the same. So sitting down and speaking with them, bringing your concerns, your questions to the table, and then let them create that retirement roadmap to get you where you want to be at the end of the day, which is hopefully, that sustainable and enjoyable retirement. But it all begins with that phone call, 804-635-3550. Once again, it's a complimentary conversation. That first visit, to come in, not going to cost you anything but your time. Could be some invaluable time. But again, 804-635-3550, or you can go online to the website at welcomehomefp.com. So yes, we all do aspire to retire. There are some who may not be retiring just yet. They may be making a job transition, perhaps the final job before they get ready to retire. And I think a question comes up, what should you do with that 401k from your former employer if you're moving jobs? There was an article that I read, gentlemen, that talked about the growing trend of job-changing cash-ins. In other words, they're withdrawing their entire 401k rather than rolling it over to their next employer or putting it into an IRA. I have reason to believe, and I've been led to believe, that this is a big mistake. Is that true, or is there some merit in doing this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it could potentially be a really big tax bomb, right? I mean, we were just talking about the $675,000 and over the 10-year period, what that could potentially look like. But, if you change jobs and you got $200,000 sitting in that account and you cash it out for whatever crazy reason, and we've seen it, we've heard about it, right? If it's all pre-tax, which most of the time it will be all pre-tax, is now you've got $200,000 that you're responsible for paying taxes on. And a lot of folks don't quite understand how that all works. But now if you're fortunate enough to work for a company that could potentially have Roth, it's a little bit of a different story depending on your age. So, there are so many different options that you've got when you change jobs. And these are one of the things that we talk about when people come in. And taxes is one of the biggest things. And a little plug here, but our first Friday in March is going to be talking about taxes. So you want to make sure that you understand penalties. You want to make sure that you understand taxation, because if you cash out, it's going to be different than a rollover. Now, talking about the rollovers, is we see it quite a bit where a lot of people will take it, and instead of, doing whatever they want to with it, they just roll it into their new employer. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, now you're kind of locked in there, and you only have, 10, 12 options, maybe 20 if you're lucky. Yeah. So if you wanted to go out and buy Bitcoin with that 401k, you're not going to be able to do it, because I've never come across 401k that allows Bitcoin. And not that I would recommend that, but just kind of showing a illustration of, right, you can do what you want to with it. But there's a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, I think number one thing that we haven't discussed is most people that are changing jobs are probably younger than 59 and a half. So if you take that cash out, you cash in your 401k, how does that affect you? Guess what? You're just giving 10% of whatever value of that account is back to the government for no apparent reason, just because you cashed it out. Mm-hmm. So Chris, if you had $100,000, how would you like to be given $10,000 penalty for taking that money out, not counting the taxes? So understand one thing, you cash out $100,000, that's added to your income. Mm-hmm. How's that going to affect your next year's taxes? Guess what? You're probably going to be in another tax bracket, paying more taxes, paying that extra penalty because you're too young to understand how that affects you and the penalty that the government imposes on you. Why do they impose that? Because they're expecting you to save money for your retirement now, because it's all about you and what you're trying to do. Because At the moment, if you take that money out, you're going to be paying taxes and penalties. And if you just lost $50,000 because you did not understand the taxation of not rolling it over, how's that going to affect you down the road? That $50,000 might be $300,000 or $400,000 towards your retirement account at the end of the day. And isn't that what we're wanting to do? Now, I understand if people do have to take some money out because of situations, but most people, they just take it because they've got it. It's just like a lot of people will take Social Security at 62 just because they can. Doesn't necessarily mean it's right.
Right.
You have to have a plan for any of that. You know, there's going to be medical emergencies that you might have to do that. But if you're just taking the money out just to have cash in your pocket to make you feel good, that makes no sense at all to me, because guess what? I don't know about you, Chris. I work too hard for my money to give it back to anybody, let alone Uncle Sam.
You know, the not just the taxation, the tax implication for taking that money out, not just if you're younger than 59 and a half, the 10% penalty you're going to get for those withdrawals, the growth potential. There's a lot of reasons why that money should not be pulled out or cashed out. Now, as you mentioned, there are situations that are going to merit it. Same sort of thing. There's reasons that people may need to start claiming Social Security at 62 out of necessity, not out of desire or, you know, just wanting to have that money as soon as possible. Those reasons are probably few and far between. But understanding, you know, the true cost of doing something like this, what that could cost, especially in the potential, which I think a lot of people probably don't take into account. They just say, oh, you know, here's a large chunk of money right now that I have access to. Let me go ahead and do it. When I got my first job at the age of 16, which Ralph would have you believe is about 4 years ago. Yeah, exactly. But when I got my first job, I was bussing tables, you know, and my mom told me then, it didn't apply then. She said, you're going to have a job in the future that offers a 401k. And what you want to do is you want to put as much money in there as your employer will match, because that is free money. Make sure you do that. And then the next part she said was, and then never touch that money. Never make any changes to that 401k. Now, for the most part, that has held true during my career, which has been longer than 4 years. Let me go and go on the record for that. And I always take advantage of employer matches, and I have yet to touch that money or do anything with it. But as I'm getting closer and closer to retirement, I know eventually there will be a point where I do need to turn those retirement accounts into a retirement plan, to find ways to withdraw it. I'm still a little bit off, but we won't get into that. But, you know, that advice for my mother has held true up until this point, but that adage only goes true for as long as possible. You know, if it comes to changing jobs, or, you know, now if you're in retirement, you want to have a proper tactical withdrawal plan. And that is where you guys help out, not just finding out, you know, how to withdraw or when to withdraw, but also what those tax implications are going to look like, how to minimize those taxes if at all possible. Tim, you mentioned the First Friday event coming up in March, talking about taxes at large. So if you want to find out more about that and meet the team, meet Ralph and Tim in an informal setting, go to welcomehomefp.com and click on the link to find out more how to attend that event. It is complimentary after all. But making sure you understand the cost of your money, the potential of your money, and the purpose of your money, which seems like a silly thing to say. Money is used to purchase goods and services, right? But do you need the money now for income? Do you need the money for growth down the line? Do you need the money for, you know, for an inheritance? What are you trying to achieve with that money? And it's not a lump sum. It's all doing one thing. You're going to have different purposes for your money. That is what I want you to take away this week on the show. If nothing else, you know, you're going to have different buckets of money, and you want to make sure they are working in your favor. That is what the team at Welcome Home Financial Partners can help you with. Get you to, through, and beyond retirement. Make sure your money, Ralph, as you said, is working as hard for you as you worked for it. But it all begins with having that plan put in place. And that's what they do. That's what they've been doing. And that is their skill set, their experience. So as I said earlier, there's power in saying you don't know how to generate this retirement income. But why not turn to a team like Welcome Home Financial Partners that can help you with that? It all starts with that complimentary conversation, no cost, no obligation. Just come in and sit down and have that conversation. 804-635-3550, or you can always find them online on the website, and that is welcomehomefp.com. As always, want to thank you so much for joining us here on Aspire to Retire with Ralph and Tim Short. Really do appreciate you taking the time to to join us this week. Hope you stay safe out there. Hope you stay warm out there. Gentlemen, appreciate the time as always. And as we wrap up, I do want to leave you with a final word.
Thank you, Chris. So, we've talked about a lot today, and I think it's really important that before you make a decision, make sure that you get all of the information, see both sides of the coin, see what would be the best fit for you. And that's where if you come into the office, we can talk through some different strategies that maybe you weren't aware of or maybe things that you've overlooked. So give us a call. We'd love the opportunity to bring you into the office, sit down, have those conversations, or come out to the first Friday in March. We'd love to see you. Everybody, thank you for listening and take care.
All content is for information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax or legal advice or provide the basis for any financial decision, nor is it intended to be a projection of current or future performance or indication or future results. Opinions expressed herein are solely those of Welcome Home Financial Partners and Welcome Home Wealth Advisors, LLC. The information contained in this material has been derived from sources believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed as to accuracy and completeness and does not purport to a complete analysis of the materials discussed. All information and ideas should be discussed in detail with your individual advisor prior to the implementation. Each individual investor's situation is different, and any ideas provided may not be appropriate for your particular circumstance. Advisor services are offered by Welcome Home Wealth Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor in the state of Virginia. Being registered as an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. Insurance products and services are offered through WPI Holding, Virginia Insurance License Number 138509, an affiliated company. The information contained herein should in no way be construed or interpreted as a solicitation to sell or offer to sell advisory services to any resident of any state other than the state of Virginia or where otherwise legally permitted. Welcome Home Wealth Advisors, LLC, and Welcome Home Financial Partners are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency.